Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Jim McCarthy. This is Navigate 2020 Part 1, an interactive webinar series that we put together to hopefully bring you some value, answer some questions, and help you manage through the COVID coup. We like that COVID coup term because it obviously turned the world upside down. It was a definite takeover, and it also references the word COUP. We've all been fairly cooped up. I'm coming to you from home office, trying to adjust to that, adjust to the noises inside the home. For those of you that have tiny humans like myself, that can be a bit disruptive at times. Also, you've got things going on outside. So we're all adjusting to that, this cooped up environment we've been living in. And I appreciate you joining us today. Hopefully you guys get a lot out of it. We have some great guys with us today, some thought leaders from our area around the First Coast, Nelson Bradshaw, the CEO at BBVA, and Carlton Robinson from the Jax Chamber. Guys, thanks for being on here. We're thrilled to have you be a part of this.
Thanks for having me.
Do it, Jim.
So we're going to get started here, and we're going to take you through a few different pieces. Let me get into the presentation. I apologize for some of the technical issues we may have if we have them. I am a C+ student, and that is just a little disclaimer you all should know. Okay, we made it to the first slide, so that's we're going to call that one in a row. I'm going to take a piece today talking about the M&A world and what's going on out there, what's happened. Nelson's going to take us through the world of banking. Obviously, they always are busy with taking care of everything they're doing from the banking standpoint, but then you get the stimulus dropped on top of them, and it's been quite a time. So we'll hear from Nelson and all they've done. They've been leaders out in the community and helping a ton of people. We're looking forward to hear from him. And then we'll finish up, saving the best for last, with the stormtrooper. Carlton and his sidekick are going to take us down a path of what he is seeing and hearing every day, talking to the entrepreneurs, small business, medium-sized business leaders that are out there, as well as the private and public large companies he's talking to, and some of the political environment he's seeing, so we can get a picture of what he thinks may be the path going forward. Throughout this, we're going to try to make it interactive and probably have a little fun along the way. We're going to have some Q&A at the end, and there's a little box you'll see on our screen there. If you can click on that, that allows you to submit a question. We are not going to use the chat or raise hand features. Submit all your questions through there, and we'll get to that portal at the end, and whatever questions we can't get to today, we will get out to you in the future via email. There will be some interactive polling coming through here. We're going to be asking some different poll questions. They're very quick, short and sweet. Give us your answers on those if you would. And here's the first test poll question. How many times has your recycling bin been completely full during the COVID-19 time? So I notice when I go on walks around the neighborhood from time to time that many of the recycling bins are full. Maybe you guys are experiencing some of that yourselves personally, as we're working through this interesting time, having to stay hydrated with your beverages of choice. So have a little fun on this first question and see what you guys think about that. Please fill that out. And as we move through the presentation and have the polling, we will share the polling results throughout the deck here. So without further ado, I will move along here. Give me a second with the technical features. So what happened? Obviously, we're all seeing a lot of different news. We're watching a lot of webinars. We've got a lot of interaction inside our own companies. This is affecting people professionally, personally, pretty much everyone in some way. Not all of it is negative. There are some things that are happening on a positive front. There are certain sectors and industries that are doing well, which sometimes in a crisis time you do see that. So it's nice to at least see some positivity. Again, our hope today is to give you guys concise information and some access for questions and be able to recognize that this is a time where very important that we have good energy, stay positive, try to have a real clear focus on what you're doing with your business and your personal lives for that matter. There's a lot of opportunity that we've had to spend time with our family, certainly more than we've ever had before. But if you look at what's going on, you obviously know about the volatile stock market, some of the industries that have been crushed. Just a couple to mention: the hospitality and the airline industry. You've seen the unemployment numbers, most likely. It's really staggering what's happened in such a short period of time. On a lighter note, you see the frozen pizza sales are up 92%, alcohol sales up 243. Everyone knows about the toilet paper crisis we've had. It's up 845%, and paper towels are up 546%. So it'd be nice if we all worked for those types of companies today. But just a little fun little look there. I think I may have contributed to some of those categories myself. Moving on here, we've got a poll question that popped up. So clearly this is affecting everyone from a revenue and cash flow standpoint. Assuming that's your biggest issue, what has been the next biggest impact that COVID-19 has had on your business? So take a quick moment and fill that out for us as we move through this. So deal activity, we're working on a number of different deals, and we're seeing some interesting things happen. In most cases, there's been a pause on all of the deals that we're working on. And it really depends upon a little variance on the stage the deal is in. So talking about a transaction, an exit, someone selling their company or raising capital, things of that nature. It's been very interesting. So some buyers are having to really focus on their existing issues inside their company. A lot of private equity folks are working on their portfolio companies and making sure they're tied down, and those things are those companies are getting through the time as best they can. So they're kind of pencils down on new acquisition opportunities, new exits. They got to get their arms around how they're going to run what they have in front of them on their plate today. The capital markets, really interesting area. I think it's going to have a large impact on bigger deals. Capital markets, for the most part, has really quieted down. You're not going to see the leverage happening, at least in the short term, out of the folks that are playing in that space. I'll get into a little bit more of that in a second. Public and private companies having a different approach depending upon which sector they're in, how they've been doing it prior going into COVID. Some are seeing this as a real opportunity, and some are scrambling. Travel restrictions have really been an issue. Typically, when we're in the middle of a transaction, the face-to-face part is very important, and not having that has caused a certain delay in a lot of our deals, and I'm hearing that from around the country in the M&A food chain. There's some political talk out there. I know that there's some things that you guys have probably seen in the news about Nancy Pelosi trying to freeze deals at $100 million, anything over $100 million. I don't know that ever happened, but it's just another piece that could impact. And just the thought of it may cause some issues with the sentiment of how buyers are looking at particular deals. Obviously, changing everybody's run rates, whether it went up, if you're in the right sector and were able to take advantage of the crisis, or if down like most as a result of all the isolation and quarantining, that's changing the deals dramatically. So some of our deals that we're looking at may change, and some may hold steady. We're still kind of waiting to see. The last part I would touch on here is that seller fatigue. For folks that are out there that had a strategic initiative in mind to exit, and they decided to get into that process, that is a tough process. So to be able to run your business and go through that, that is a lot from a bandwidth standpoint. It takes its toll on folks. When you drop in a crisis like COVID on top of that, it creates all sorts of issues. And so I believe we'll see some folks that are having some seller fatigue, tired, run down, questioning things, wondering whether or not they should still try to go through with their exit. And on the flip side of that, I think there'll be many people that are saying, we definitely want to do some type of exit, take some chips off the table potentially, so that we don't have to go through these types of things again. So maybe folks that didn't have that as an initiative, that will now become on the radar. Takes me just a second to move these slides around. So I think everybody's pretty much familiar with EBITDA. Now we have EBITDAC. earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and Corona. Really unsure as to how this is going to impact modeling when it comes to putting together deals, enterprise values, valuations. I've been searching long and hard over the last 30 days, talking to experts all around the industry and all pieces of the food chain, and I'm getting such a wide variety of answers to this. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how this plays out. What type of discount is going to be ascribed to folks' business when you have to factor in what's going on from a lost revenue standpoint, et cetera, because of the virus. It's clearly something that nobody could really plan for. It's sort of once in a generation, lifetime, century. How much impact is that going to have when folks are looking at that valuation, enterprise value type of stuff? The one thing I can tell you for sure is that we have to wait longer, unfortunately, to see, because there's no clear-cut answer today. Some folks are saying that there will be, some discount, some more. Some are going to really look at risk differently. But I think ultimately we need to get a little more time to see how things respond in the coming 2-3 months, and how people's P&Ls, et cetera, start to shape up. Another poll question here. Going forward, I intend to focus on any of the following here, whatever's most important to you. Please fill out for us. I'm going to get through my last piece here so you can get rid of my ugly mug and we can move on to our actual talented folks today. The preparation here is going to be key. A lot of times in a crisis, I talked, earlier about staying positive, staying focused, having good energy, being intentional. Something a friend of mine, Pat McManaman, had taught me about, and even wrote a book about it. Being intentional about what you're doing. Get your arms around your business and really focus at a level that you haven't before. It's going to be super obvious that we got to pay attention to cash flow, right? Look at our P&L, see maybe if there isn't a way to get that a little healthier, maybe things we put off, it's easier to make decisions on now. And figuring out some key things, like, do you need to pivot? We'll get more into that in some of Carlton's talks later in the presentation. But big piece here in the time of crisis is leading your people. And that doesn't apply to owners and executives. That applies to anybody who's interacting with folks. Lead. You never know what that person is going through. So lead, positive energy, help them, be thoughtful about what you're doing. This will also touch on when we get later in the presentation, but intensifying the focus on your customers. Without the customers, obviously, we don't have businesses. So paying extra close attention to them, having some real empathy for them and what they're going through, figuring out ways to help them, go above and beyond to do that. And the last little piece I would touch on for folks that are considering getting in that M&A space, or whether you're already in it, you got to be prepared, because what's happening and what I'm hearing from buyers, all different types of buyers in the food chain, is you got to be ready. And you not only need to be ready, you need to show them you're ready. Okay, so it's a two-part thing. It's one thing to be ready and have your ducks in a row, but it's another thing to show them that you, the leader, and your management team, executive team, leadership folks, whoever they are, you are ready and prepared. You've managed through the COVID crisis. You have a plan and you're ready to go. They will take a lot of confidence into that. And it's, again, people working with people. So buyers want to know that they've got the right folks, they're betting on the right horses, and then they move forward. Okay, so be ready to go, because unfortunately, less deals are probably going to be done in the short term. And if you're not ready, chances are you may get skipped over. So that's what I've got for my piece. Let's take a look at the poll results from this first session here. Recycling bin looks like an overwhelming part of the population here says it was overflowing. That's what I see in my neighborhood and in my own driveway. So thanks for participating in that one. What's the next one here? Client retention, marketing are keys, and then we'll get some Q&A. I can see the Q&A bubbling up already. I appreciate that. please keep sending those in, and we will try to get to all of them, as I mentioned. And the last one, what we're going to be focusing on, strategic. Okay, strategic and customer attention. Very good. Excellent. Okay, so without further ado here, I would like to get my technology fixed here. And we introduce Nelson Bradshaw again, First Coast, Northeast Florida's CEO for BBVA. I've known Nelson for some time. He has done a heck of a job leading the bank through this. He's had a ton on his plate, personally and professionally. He's done a heck of a job managing through multiple heavy crises. And I've watched and listened to a lot of the clients that work with BBVA praise him and the team on what they've been able to do, getting through all the stimulus stuff. But he's got a lot to share with you today. Nelson, again, I know you've got a lot on your plate. Thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this. I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Glad to be a part of it. Of course, the banking world, for the most part, has stopped everything else it was doing and concentrated on the PPP loans. Going through round two, we're actually very surprised that most bankers thought that within a few days the round two funds were going to run out. But what we found is the smaller companies did a better job of getting their applications ready to go with this round, and we're seeing a lot smaller average loan size. So in fact, at 79,000, that's about a third of the average loan size as round two. So we've gone through, as of end of last week, 176 billion of the 320 billion allocated for the program. And then of course you see the numbers for Florida. We certainly got our share of it, and numbers are somewhat similar in average loan size as to other, but probably reflects that we have more of a tourism, small business economy than maybe the folks as a whole. So let's flip to the next slide. So we've gotten through PPP. Well, let's stop here for a second and take our poll. So if you've applied or know someone who's applied for the PPP loan, which is applicable, so take your pick, best choice there. But you know, there are many businesses that, for one reason, usually it was the number of employees, were not eligible for the PPP program, and they're still a big part of our economy. Have a lot of employees, so what's available for those companies? And this is still a work in process, but we think in the next maybe this week that we're going to have the final outcome of the government's what they're calling the Main Street Lending Program. One of the big differences of this program is there is no loan forgiveness piece to this. But you see down under, and plus for the banks with the PPPs, we were really just a administrative staff, so to speak, administrative arm for the SBA to issue those loans. The banks took no risk in terms of credit risk for those. They're 100% guaranteed from the bank standpoint. And these loans, the banks are going to take some risk. You see under the three various loan types from 5 to 15%. These are really meant to be bridge loans over a few years. So 4 years is the loan term, with the first year having no payments. And the rate on the PPPs, as you know, was LIBOR +1. This is more of a true market rate, LIBOR +3. But the real advantage of these loans is that they will allow you to do a lot larger loans, and they will also allow you to have more leverage. And the banks are going to be willing to do this because we're not having to put as much capital at risk when we only have to retain 5 to 15% of the loan. So again, and another difference in this is the language around employees. They're specifically saying that these companies must make commercially reasonable efforts to maintain its payroll and retain its employees, versus the language in PPP was basically it had to keep those employees. So there's a lot more sort of give and take in that range overall. So, you know, for the rest of the year, from an economic standpoint, our economists are forecasting a contraction of about a 4.4% in GDP. But as you've read, there are a lot of industries that are taking it more so on the chin than others than that. So it might feel like it's a lot worse than that. But we actually see, as long as we don't have that second rebound of COVID-19, the virus, in the fall, that all of a sudden the numbers of those catching it, and we have to sort of go back down into lockdown mode, we actually feel pretty good about 2021 with about a 3.4% projected GDP growth for next year. So, you know, the plan is, how do you get through this year and be ready for when growth happens again the next year? So let's go ahead and flip to the next slide, if we would. So now what? So either you got your PPP program, you're set up for the Main Street lending program, or trying to. And I tell you, one of the things that I think businesses have found extremely important as they've gone through this process is the value of having a true relationship with their banker. That they don't, maybe they haven't borrowed money, had a reason to borrow money in the past, and they just sort of, you know, they knew the teller at the local branch, but they really didn't have a good contact that worked with their business. And I think, you know, those that had that contact and working in this PPP process and doing those applications found the value of that, and it's going to continue to be the value, a big value as you go through, more so than ever. You know, the PPP loans helped you get through the next couple of months. The mainstream, if you're able to take advantage, will help you sort of get through the rest of the year. But you're going to have a plan and work that plan early and often. So, Jim, let's go ahead and flip to the next slide here. Oh, well, let's pause a minute. We'll go ahead and do our poll here. How are you leveraging your relationship with a financial institution to plan for the rest of the year? So, you know, I'm sure all of you have done a business plan of some kind, but when you're meeting with your banker, let's go ahead and flip again to the next screen, if you would. There we go. But if you meet with your banker, and as you prepare for that plan, they're going to be asking a lot of questions that are more particular as part of that plan to, you know, what's happened with COVID-19. And so, you know, your revenue impact, how are you dealing with that? Your customer impact, a whole lot of questions about the supply chain. You know, especially if your supply chain was coming from overseas. A lot of your raw materials and product were coming from overseas. What do you have in terms of continuity planning with the rest of your staff, and the fact that you're not able to meet? And as they say, cash is king. And so you need to be preparing a monthly P&L for the rest of 2020 and 2021. Reduce those expenses where you can, and it is very important that you meet with your banker sooner rather than later, because we're about to have a bit of a pause between the PPP stuff winding up and maybe pick up a little bit with Main Street lending, but the banks are going to really start seeing the effects of the lack of cash flow from the few months that we have right now toward the second half of the summer, and they are going to be inundated with problem loans and dealings with issues. So you need to get with them now, work out your plan, what capital are you going to need for the rest of the year? Many clients are going to trip their financial covenants and be in default from a financial covenant perspective, even if they're able to make their payments. So they need to be having those discussions with their banks about what their plan is, why they should be willing to forgive or to continue lending on their lines of credit and whatnot. So again, can't put enough emphasis on that. Your banker will be glad to sort of help you, point you in the right way, but you just got to have a great relationship there. All right, Jim, let's flip to the next. I think we have a couple of polls here. All right, we're going to share some results.
Grant, you coming back to me?
Okay, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this poll. This, you know, I know we're going to get a lot of questions on applied, received funding, and have no idea what to do now on that. So in our Q&A section, we'll probably cover that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Nelson. So we got the first poll result up here now. Are there any others, Grant, coming through? There we go. There's another one. So you see how important it is, and Nelson talking about obviously the details and the metrics of what's going on out there, and then the importance of the relationship with your bank, and not necessarily what's happening this very second about the stimulus and all that. That is critical. We recognize that. But going forward, maybe what some folks aren't thinking about is some of the maybe lumpy times ahead where you're going to need to rely on your bank, and the covenant issue that I would guess many people are not thinking of right this second is one to get out in front of and make sure you're communicating. I think that's a great thing to bring up and recognize it. Great leadership on your point, Nelson, for pointing that out, something I hadn't thought of myself. So great piece there from Nelson. Let's turn it over to Mr. Carlton Robinson with the Jax Chamber and his sidekick, the Stormtrooper. He's going to take us through his piece. I think you guys will find it very insightful, and we'll have some polling here. And then when he wraps up, we'll get into the Q&A at the end. So Carlton, thanks again for being on here. Really appreciate you being a part of it, and looking forward to hearing what you've got to say today. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jim, for having me, and definitely thank you for putting this together and talking with small business owners, medium-sized businesses across the country. You know, one of the things that every community needs is a trusted source. And I think having venues like this where we can share what we're experiencing with a greater community is a really big advantage, especially here in Jacksonville. The biggest question that I get from my conversations with business owners is, how do I make the pivot? And we saw from the earlier poll, strategy was a really big thing. So what I want to cover is 4 ways that I think you can make the pivot. So the first one, and Nelson kind of touched on this, you know, there's changes to business planning. So one of the things that we want to make sure of is that we're application ready. And speaking with the SBA and bankers like Nelson, you know, one of the most critical aspects of business right now is being ready. And what that means is having a capability statement for your company that communicates your capacity, having recorded cash flow, being able to communicate your business and revenue models. Nelson touched on those. The more equipped you are and the better communicator you are about your business and operations, the more opportunities are going to arise for you. The second part of that is being nimble. Most entrepreneurs and innovators right now, as weird as this may sound, like they're excited. They're like, it's our time now. We can come up with solutions and ways that we can be innovative. And that's what's going to pull us out of this period of adversity. So being nimble, being responsive to your customers, responsive to your supply chain, Those are big ways and elements where you can make a pivot. Next slide, Jim. And looks like we have a poll. And as I mentioned, I've talked to lots of entrepreneurs and business owners in different parts of the country. Some of them are actually experiencing gains and increases in business, some no change. Majority of us are, feeling the adverse impact. So if you take this poll and communicate what you're experiencing. And then on this next slide, this might be one of my favorite areas when I'm working with businesses, is really identifying what are the customer development opportunities. And in the poll earlier, we talked about customer attention. And there's 3 ways that we can pay our customers more attention. One is going to be the discovery process. So we can take this extra time that we have working remotely and evaluate, how do our customers discover us? How do they get to us? And then on the other side of that, we can take a look at the processes that we have in place internally and say, how do we get to our customers? So what are we teaching, educating our employees? How can we be better at contacting the customers? And then I would say the most fun, and I'm just excited to talk about these kind of things, is probably taking that customer journey. So right now, you could go through the entire process from contact to conversion as a customer of your own business. And what you'll find is some of those areas where we might have some choke points in that process. And so the key is going to be, are we making it easy for our customer to have a great experience with us? Or are we losing some because that process, there's some choke points in there? And then the last part on this slide is really empathy and relationship selling. And I think, bankers like Nelson and his team have done a really good job with this. And I've heard great things about BBVA. It's not so much selling right now. Lots of people are hurting. You want to empathize with that. And then you really want to build that relationship and find out their needs, what they're experiencing, their pains, the things they'd like to gain. And as a result of that, there's going to be an opportunity for them to do business with you. And if they have a great experience and that relationship is being built, there's probably going to be opportunities for business as you move forward. Next slide, Jim. And now, and here at the Chamber, I have, several programs, and I wanted to at least give you a high level, the 4 ways that most companies are looking to innovate. So obviously you have a new product in a new market. That's something you could introduce. I'll tell you right now, the more technology driven and remote companies are experiencing a lot of success in this area because COVID-19 has forced more people to use technology. So that's creating an entirely different market than what existed, let's say 2 months ago. In terms of a new product in an existing market, this is where you need to evaluate and assess your vertical markets. And so which of my vertical markets are performing well and which are the most sustainable? And we can talk more about this in the Q&A, but a new product in an existing market, you're going to really need to refine and hone in on your core verticals. And then in terms of process, so those businesses that have good processes in place, and this is really a key to even obtaining capital. When you're having a conversation with a potential lender, one of the things they want to know is how does your business work? Tell me about your supply chain. And if those things, sound like they could be interrupted or of low quality, it's going to impact that decision point. And then that 4th one, the business and the revenue model, all of us, especially here at the Chamber, we're going to have to evaluate our business and revenue models. We're doing that as a leadership team. The biggest factor for most of the small and medium-sized businesses is really twofold. And we have to be extremely careful here. So 1, does my business model work for the COVID-19 environment? How do I adjust? And then what will work post COVID-19, whenever that is. So one of the things that we don't want to do is completely disrupt our entire business and think that how we're operating during this environment is going to be the path forward. So you're going to have to strike some type of balance with those different strategies. But the business and revenue models are things that I'm sure your bankers that you have a good relationship with will be more than happy to engage with. Next slide, Jim. We have a poll. So which of the 4 methods of innovating have you considered or you might consider in order to move forward? So new product, new market, new product, existing market, process, or business model. And I think for me, it's going to be, at least today, it'll be process because that's tied to technology. So that's something, next slide, Jim. Something that we had to really adopt here at the Chamber. You know, once we decided we were going to be working remotely, we had to transition a lot of our activities online. And so the question is, what does your technology stack look like? And some may say, well, what the heck is a technology stack? And so your technology stack is a list of all the technology service that you use to interact with your customers and your suppliers. So for some of you, it would be things like Amazon Web Services, FormStack, Google, Jira, Salesforce, Slack, Trello, Zendesk. And a good technology stack will enable you to have more integrations and automations. And so if you think about it, the more automation you can have in your business right now, the more customers you can reach, the more customers you can serve, and the more nimble and responsive you can be. And so we can cover a few more of those as we move into the Q&A, but I wanted to give you an overview of some of the things that I've had conversations with in terms of making the pivot. So 1, it's changes to business planning. 2, it's going to be customer development opportunities. 3, it's going to be finding one of the 4 ways that companies are innovating. And then that final piece is going to be the technology stack. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Carlton. That was awesome. Great insight. And the Chamber is a great resource for so many. And I know that I know you've enjoyed the discussions you've had throughout this, especially with your Small Business Leaders of the Year. It's a special little roundtable you've got that you can draw on for insight, and then obviously use that to help all of us. So thanks again for being a part of this. We do have one final poll question as we move into the Q&A. Again, I'm not exactly sure if we've had any technical difficulties today or not, but if we have, I apologize. We're going to go through the poll results now, and then we're going to do our closing poll question before we get to the Q&A. We'll get into that in just a second here. So as we mentioned before, this is part 1 of Navigate 2020, and this is a series, and we already have number 2 and 3 in the works, and we already have some very talented folks that are going to join us to speak more specifically. And we're trying to look to find ways to help you bring value in a more specific manner. But we'd love some help from you guys as to what you'd like to hear. So take a look at the poll here and click on what's most important to you, what you'd like to learn more about, where you have questions, and we will have those subject matter experts on our panels in the webinars that are upcoming. So you can take care of that, then we'll get into our poll results, our last piece of that, and then we'll move into the Q&A. We've got a great full Q&A bucket here. Very excited about that. So we'll get into that in just a second. We look at these poll results here. So what percentage change has this had on your business? So increase, you can see, well, it went away on my screen. So there we go. There we go. Increase 20%, we have 0. We do have some folks out there that have increased somewhat, which is good to see. No change also. And then obviously things you'd expect to see here. Some decreases of different sizes. So interesting to see that. That's probably similar to what's out there on a macro standpoint as well. Which of the 4 methods of innovating have you considered? So new product, new market, new product, existing market, process. I think that will be the key one. I think Carlton gave you guys sort of the answer to the test on that one. Optimization of your business through automation, that is going to be key. The others are important as well, but that's a process thing we can all start with and trying to find ways to enhance how we're doing things. Any more on here, Grant? Is there one left?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, so I'm gonna get, just a quick last second shot for you guys to throw in any questions you may have left. We're gonna try to get to all of them. I hope you've enjoyed the first 3 hours of our webinar. It went by pretty fast for 3 hours. We will address every question that comes in today, even if we can't get to it in the time allotted. As I mentioned before, we'll email those out to you. And we've also set up a generic email. If in fact you find yourselves in a tough spot and you want to ask a quick question, you can see at the bottom of the screen here, navigateqa@gmail.com. You can send it there anytime in the future going forward, and we will try to respond to those as fast as we can. Really recognizing that, any chance we have to try to help you guys out. So take advantage of it. We'll send out an email with that email in it as well, so you have it handy in a couple of spots. But without further ado, let me move into the Q&A portion here. So I'm going to attempt to do that. And I think we're back. And I think that may have been another technological advancement by yours truly. So that's maybe not 2 in a row, maybe back to 1 in a row with some of the issues I had earlier in the thing. But let me get into the questions here, and I'll try to move through these as quick as we can so that you guys can get back to your regular lives and work. So let's see here. I've got some comments. I've got clients' confidence is low and traffic completely off. So that's not surprising. I think that's probably common. I'm sure Carl and Nelson would agree that folks, this is a crisis. It's an uneasy time. So many times in an uneasy situation, people will pencils down and, let's look inside and see what we're doing and think and focus and replan. And it's, there's just a lot going on. And unfortunately, there's probably some folks that are a little bit lost. And I would encourage you, if any of you are on this webinar, if you are, just recognize and know that there's folks out there to help you. We're here to help. There are other people around you that can help you. Start asking the right questions, start challenging things, and start building a path to get yourselves back to where you want to be. Here's another one here. I've got a question for Carlton. What are some of the things small businesses are doing or should be doing going forward?
So outside of the 4 points that I made, I would say the most important thing for us right now is how we plan. And so I'll answer that in 2 parts. One, for most of us, we have planned our businesses on a 6 months, 12 months table. We really need to move that up, and we need to have a 60-day plan and what I call a 120-day plan. So that causes us to really take a look at what's happening today, those quick results. So that give us 2 cycles in 60 days. And then over a period of 4 months, that gives us 4 cycles. So what do I want my business operation to look like? What types of experiences? It's a shorter cycle, but it's going to allow us to be more responsive. And my recommendation would be, whether you're going to receive funding or not, you should really structure your business as if you were going to go after funding, because then you're kind of crossing the T's, dotting the I's of all the things that you need to have in place. And whether it be 6 months or 12 months from now, you'd be in pretty good shape. And then you should also be having a regular conversation with a bank. Okay, have a really good relationship, because they can give you insight that helps keeps you on the right path.
Thanks, Carlton. That came from an anonymous attendee there. The first one was from Kate. Kate, thanks for sending your questions. You guys have the option to be anonymous or send your name. If you don't want me to announce your name and embarrass you, then don't put your name on there. But if you don't mind.
Was that, Jim, was that the anonymous or an anonymous?
That was You know, I got to scroll down through all these. There may be more. I think it's anonymous. I think there's more than one anonymous. Maybe we have a few bashful folks that don't want to see their names up in the lights here. Okay, I've got another one here. Deals that clients had established being postponed, which has led to issues regarding 2019 10K and quarterly reporting for clients. Okay, that's coming from Alex McDermott. Alex, thanks for the question. It looks like the postponed issue. Okay, got it. So yeah, there definitely are. There's all sorts of issues like that happening. Nelson, maybe you could touch on that a little bit, maybe from a banking standpoint about the reporting requirements and maybe things that have gotten delayed. I don't know if you have some insight on that.
Well, yeah, most of our banks, most of our loan agreements do have reporting requirements that they have to adhere to, quarterly tax returns or whatnot. And so for the most part, the banks are going to be pretty generous on this. Again, it's just having good communication. If you're going to be delayed in your reporting, don't wait till you're 2 months past and they finally get to the list and come ask you about it. Send them a note, send your contact a note and said, hey, for these reasons, we're probably going to be delayed in getting our results out. We'll get it and just want to let me know if that creates any concern. And so, again, the key to it is communications. One of the things that the regulators have been pretty clear to the banks about is that we can have a certain amount of leniency both in deferring loan payments and other things, and not considered it a troubled loan if the company was performing well beforehand, before COVID-19 versus now. So those would be my insight in that, Jim.
Great. Thank you, Nelson. I think, Alex, in general, I'm not sure we hit exactly what you were looking for in your question there, but I think what you're saying in that statement, I think it's common. I think that postponement, that pencils down, that pause moment that's happening in a lot of areas. I think there's folks starting to at least sharpen their pencils, and a few picking them up even today. But over the last 6-8 weeks, however long this has been, I think that postponing is common. I think you're going to see some of that reporting issue as we go forward. I've got another one here. This is, are there any, whoops, sorry, I went too fast on my little machine here. Are there any specific resources you would recommend for small businesses and entrepreneurs? That is one for my man, Carlton.
Yeah. So that is a great question. And right now, I think most of our resources are in transition. And so I think we're about 6 weeks out from the beginning of remote working. And the first thing that we need to do is to identify, depending on what industry you're in, what are your trusted sources? So obviously, the Chamber, we see ourselves as a trusted source in several areas. The Small Business Development Center at UNF, they're a trusted source. The SBA, but for our more, I'm going to say, innovative companies that are using lots of technology, that's one of the things that I'm working on right now is how can we pull some resources together and be a trusted source so we can advise, coach, and educate businesses on being better with automation. And so I'm probably about 3 weeks away from having something on that, but it's really going to be, pulling together experienced entrepreneurs that are in this field. They're not necessarily associated with the Chamber, but I've got to get them all together in order to keep our companies moving forward. So I'll get with Jim and we'll disseminate that information once I'm able to pull those resources together. But I'm definitely looking at different types of opportunities to support entrepreneurs and innovators. It's going to be different for all of us moving forward, and I want to make sure that we're supporting.
Great, thanks, Carlton. Grant, just as a side note here, we're bumping up into the noon hour, and we have tons of questions we're happy to keep this open. We don't want to occupy you guys longer than you want to be here. But we'll keep it open for a little while after the bell. Grant, just from a technology standpoint, is that okay, or does this thing just die at 1 o'clock?
Nope, we'll be good.
Okay. Okay. So we're, again, we'll move through these. We'll try to get through them a little bit quicker if we can. And whatever's left over, we'll send to you guys. So for those who have lost, that last question was from Tom T. Tom T, thank you. For those who have lost their job or business and are looking to transition into a different industry, what particular industries or market segments would you anticipate the best opportunities after we get through COVID? So great question. That's coming from Maria. Okay, Maria, thank you. I think at any time, folks may be forward-thinking enough to know it's always good to be in what people would refer to as a recession-proof business. There are not tons of those, and I think that maybe you could argue that the ones that are labeled recession-proof maybe aren't exactly that. But I think places that fall in that type of bucket, but I think you also got to look at some of the things like, I think technology is obviously going to do very well as we move forward. Automation is going to be key and king for a while, optimization. You know, I think Nelson and Carl, what other spots would you guys recommend to folks to be looking at beyond technology?
Well, I think any businesses that help you do things in a more remote setting are going to do well. I think healthcare has really been hurt, you know, and that was one of the key growth areas in the economy. But it's very specific to this virus. Once the virus goes away, that business will be back, but there's going to be a whole lot of I think of different thinking than just going to the doctor, physically seeing them, other tools in the area of healthcare that I think is going to be a real winner out there.
Yeah. And I would add, Jim, as you know, here at the Chamber, as we take a look at interest from outside of our region and development from an economic perspective, financial services is going to continue to be an industry. I mean, that's evolving. So that's one industry that does very well here in Northeast Florida and nationwide. Obviously, you mentioned healthcare, but there's going to be probably 2 or 3 different verticals in that space. Manufacturing, it's still going to continue to be one of those areas for Northeast Florida that, I mean, really presents some opportunities. And so in terms of, you know, which industries we should be connected to, I think we look at the health of Northeast Florida because we're so spread out and diverse. There'll be a lot of opportunities here. And I can give you, I can provide you with some links, Jim, a little bit later from Jax USA that you can share with the group.
Okay, that'd be great. That'd be great. Anything like that would be helpful, Carl, giving access to these resources for everybody, I think is very helpful. Okay, I've got another one here. If I need a bank loan now, how long on average is it taking to get a loan approved in the current environment? Well, I think we should have our bank person answer that question. Nelson, I'll give that one to you. That's coming from Michael. Michael, thank you.
Okay. Well, you know, as we discussed, most banks have diverted almost all of their resources that typically had done with their regular loan request to the PPP program. And I think that you're going to start seeing banks move those resources back into their natural setting over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So I would say if it normally took 30 days to get a loan approval prior to this, right now I'm saying it's going to probably take you 60 days if it's got any size to it. If it's a smaller loan, say, you know, under $1 million, and a bank's using a centralized underwriting facility, I would probably say that normally would take 1 week to 2 weeks. That would probably, I would pretty much double your time right now. Whatever your time is, double it. But I think 45 days from now, that that's going to contract again. We're going to get back a little closer to the norms as the banks are able to put those resources back where they should have been. But as I said in part of my presentation, I think later this year we're going to see the times expand again, because banks are going to have so many problem loans on their hands, and those just eat up a lot of time and resources from an underwriting standpoint. So that's sort of my best guess from what I've seen, and what I've seen in I've been through my career 3 or 4 different scenarios, not exactly like this, but economic downturns and issues like this. So I think that's where we'll be.
Okay. Thank you, Nelson. Very helpful. I've got a couple of questions just popped up from Alex Jenkins. I've been in some events around town, and he always asks great questions. He's got 2 here. The first one is, how early is too early to start drinking on a Tuesday? So that's that is usually not the type of question that he asks. He asks very poignant questions. How early is too early to start drinking on a Tuesday? I'm going to say, in my opinion,
hey Jim, there's sitting coffee in my cup.
in my
It is Cinco de Mayo.
I think that is a relative question, and I will just leave it at that. More serious question from Alex. Let's see here. He's got very general question, but what are PE companies doing to try and grow revenue in their portfolio of companies? It feels as if all transactional commerce is completely paused. What are the sentiments here? So that's more typical of the question that you will find from Alex. And Alex may, in fact, be involved in one of these webinars coming up soon. So Alex, great question. The PE companies that we're talking to, we talked to a lot, dozens of them. And it's a little mixed. And usually what we're finding is it depends upon what sandbox they play in. So if they are in a spot where their portfolio companies have not been as affected as much from the COVID issue, then they have a pretty good outlook on things, and they are looking to get their money out, and they are looking to kind of keep moving forward, and they see opportunity. If they're not in the right sandbox, they are really pencils down across the board on new deals, on putting money out, and they're really working on their portfolio companies operationally, trying to make sure that those are going to be okay as they move forward before they start putting more money out. The one thing that I will say that is common with all of them, they all have money. They all have dry powder. They got a lot of it. So I think there's going to be some pent-up demand at some point for that to get back to work when we get moving forward. So,
Jim, I'll add in on that. Those that I've talked to, there are going to be some real opportunities. There are going to be some companies that end up in a cash crunch, and they're going to be willing to sell at a lower multiple. And as you say, they do have a lot of dry power to put in the marketplace. So I think there are going to be some that are going to be opportunistic in what they and looking out there right now for some folks that have to have the capital today or are willing to take a discount on it.
I agree. Okay, here's another one. Question for Carlton. Sorry, guys, I just moved my mouse too fast. Bear with me, I'm sorry. Here we go. Are we seeing enhancements to our corporate recruiting efforts as a city in the wake of COVID? I would think we had a lot of value to corporations seeking relocation than to some of the more household names like Nashville, Charlotte, Austin. Ultimately, does the Chamber think that this will help JRCC, Jax USA grow Northeast Florida?
Thanks, Jim. So that's, as a leadership team, one of the things that, we're tasked with is constant economic development. And so while I can't speak to pending deals, I can tell you the team has been extremely busy. And one of the advantages that we have is as we evaluate COVID-19 and what's happening, Jacksonville is spread out, and we've got a really big advantage as a region because of how far we're spread out. And what we used to say was a disadvantage in not having density, is becoming more of an advantage in terms of selling the region. So there's lots of opportunities and there's lots of activity right now from the Jax USA team in recruiting and talking with businesses. So I think we're in pretty good shape there, just a matter of engagement.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. Next one, question for Jim. What advice would you have for someone thinking about selling a business but have struggled through COVID downturn, how to best prepare? Okay, that's coming in from John Thompson. John, thank you for that. The last question was David Matthews. Thank you, David. If you're just thinking about it now, and maybe that was motivated by what we're going through, I think that will be a large bucket of folks, actually, that will think that way. I think the best thing that you can do is really start to look inside your organization and start trying to clean up the areas that may need cleaning, start looking at your financial statements, talk to your professional advisors that you have that you trust, and begin to put together a strategic plan for how you're going to go about doing this. And the key will be, you really want to, you just need to have all your ducks in a row. It's okay if there's issues. In deals, it's very hard to get past an issue if it wasn't properly disclosed, if it wasn't properly identified, tracked, whatever you want to call it. I tell folks all the time, and clients we work with in deals, that everybody's got stuff, okay? Everybody's got issues. If you've been in business for any length of time, stuff happens, okay? You don't get every single decision right. You make mistakes, things pop up, whatever it is. If you manage those correctly and button them up and then communicate them correctly in a deal process, then you can get through almost any issue. Obviously, there's going to be some craters that could kill a deal, but absence of some major problem, you can get through most of that stuff. But I think it starts with building a strategic plan about what you're going to do and get your professional advisors around you to help you do that and as you move forward. And I think be deliberate about it. Be very deliberate about it and get ready to be prepared. And it's not an easy task. So, roll up the sleeves and get ready to put forth some effort.
Jim, let me add a couple of thoughts there.
Sure.
Part of what he's pointing to is, right now folks are hunkered down in their own businesses and how are you going to get any value? So, not knowing the specifics of this business, I would be out there looking, who is a company that would have it that you could add value. They don't have your product line. Maybe you have certain manufacturers you rep that would be of value to them to reach out. So I think part of it is doing your due diligence on what kind of company or person would benefit from having your organization. What do you do uniquely that would be complementary to theirs? So I think that's going to be your best bet in maximizing, is finding a strategic buyer versus someone who's just looking for a company that produces a certain amount of income in an industry they're interested in.
Totally agree, Nelson. I think I was talking more about, excuse me, the internal prep of what to do.
Yeah, right.
Parts and Nelson referencing the strategic outlook you need when you're looking out there throwing a net to see where you may best fit. That's very critical. Great point. Next question from Landon Strickland. How did the financial crisis of 2008 impact the way you navigate the COVID crisis? Well, for those of us that got to live through both of those, congratulations. Some of us have lived through more than just those two. I think it is probably, it's a great question, Landon, and it's great to see you throwing one in there. I think people are more prepared today because of 2008. I think going through 2008 and coming out of that, I think businesses got smarter about how they were operating, how they were doing things. I think they were more responsible, more detailed, more focused on metrics about running their businesses. And so I feel like for those that went through it, I feel like there was some level of preparation that was greater than what they had prior to going through that 2008, taking the things they learned from that and being able to utilize some of it as we move through the COVID stuff. Would you guys add anything to that?
Well, I will tell you, one of the things that made that crippled the markets then was the fact that the banks didn't have the capital to support those losses. And since that time, actually, the requirements of banks that we've had to actually hold about 50% more capital than we used to. And that's why the too big to fail, the government had the largest 50 banks sort of go through and put plans that if you had certain economic factors hit you, could you survive? And so I think especially from the finance industry and who's key to supporting businesses, that's a major change.
And I would add to that, Jim, I think, when we take a look back at '08 and the lessons that we learned from an economic development standpoint, what that forced us to do is to be more aware of the different economic cycles. So I can recall several conversations that I had with some investors and financial institutions, even 12 months ago, in that they said, hey, we've had a great run with this economy. At some point, there's going to be a trigger, and we've got to be prepared at that time. And so we knew, we didn't know about COVID-19, but we knew at least a year ago that we'd had a great run and we should start preparing our business and operations for a little bit of a downturn. And so I think the recovery will be much faster, and we can feel confident that we've got lots of organizations that, let's not say prepared for COVID-19, but prepared to recover, versus in '08, we were probably shocked.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that's a good follow-up. Alex Kellison says, how do you evaluate the adequacy, efficacy, and completeness of your firm's technology stack? Well, that is going to be a great question, more specifically for when we have a technology expert on the phone, on the call, on the webinar, whatever you want to call this thing, and that will be soon. But we could probably tackle that a little bit for you today, Alex, and touch on it. I am somewhat allergic to technology, but I will yield to the other fine gentleman here. We work with a ton of technology companies, so I think one quick way to answer what we see some of our clients do is getting some analysis from some professional advisory firm or someone that specializes in that. That's one way to start. It's kind of a generic answer for you, so I'll yield to these guys to see if they have something more specific for you.
Well, I will tell you, in the banking industry, a lot of folks working remote. How do you do your financials? How do you keep up with your cash flow movement when your staff is remote and you don't have ledgers and whatnot? So I had a lot of folks that have moved, and there's some companies that accounting firms that Jim's firm he's associated can help you with having systems that are online. And both not only for just your accounting, but for your bill paying, lots of products out there for also your invoicing. So they're going to the fintech. That's where we've seen some great advances in the last 4 or 5 years, and resources on the technology side that will help you operate remotely, as well as being more efficient overall.
Yeah, and the only small thing I would add, Jim, is, and I'm really excited about this whole area, because the focus is really, in the question, is around design thinking, right? And the service design, depending on the size of your business. So you're assessing the entire service design, which is going to create a lot of business opportunities. But to Jim's point, that assessment is going to be important. Once you get the assessment, then you want to take a look at your service design as an enterprise. Excellent.
Okay, guys, we won't keep you too much longer. I'll do 2 more, and then we will send out the answers to the rest that we've got here. This is from Alex Singh. Alec, thanks for joining today. He's got something for Nelson. Nelson, there were rumors that some small businesses that applied for a PPP in round 1 didn't get the funds as they were not a priority client for the bank with which they applied, meaning some banks gave preferential treatment to their key customers. Would like your thoughts.
Well, I heard some of those same things out there, and the challenge was the sheer volume. When you look at the number, and Carlton can speak probably better than I can to the numbers of small businesses out there going through a portal where we got. I know several banks that got within 2 days 10,000 applications, and their 10,000 applications is what they're used to running through their bank for over a 5-year period. So it was very difficult. I think that the reason that a lot of the larger companies were able to get their funds approved is because, as Carlton said, they were application ready. They had more resources to put together the application and a more clear, concise basis, and get it through. And quite honestly, the first 12 hours of the windows being open. So I know it does perhaps look like that, but I think a lot of it was the fact that they were application ready, as well as they had a relationship with a banker that could tell them what they needed to do in terms of that application, maybe having them look at it versus someone who just filled out the app the best they could and put it through a portal. So those are the main things that we truly saw out there.
Thank you, Nelson. We got time for one more here. Jack Heelan. Jack, thanks for joining today. Where can you get help verifying eligibility for a PPP loan? Nelson, you're up again.
Well, eligibility, it's in the regulations now. What some folks have said, or the banks are making those decisions, and no, the banks are just the administrative agent of the SBA with the PPP loans. And in fact, one of the reasons the bank struggled the first few days, because this program was thrown together so quickly, was because it wasn't clear exactly when it said you needed to substantiate your payroll. Well, what did that mean? What level of documentation did you have to do that? So I think that for the most part, you can go to the SBA and look at the documents, and I think it's pretty good. But at this point, I would take that and try and get with a banker, and because now that we've looked at a lot of these, we sort of know what's going to get accepted, and they can maybe give it a quick run through before you put it in. But it got pretty simple in the end.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, from what we hear from clients, it was clunky because the information was being marketed by the federal government in one way, and the banks were receiving it in another way, and it was sort of a chicken and the egg problem. And I think the banks were put in a tough spot there, and you guys did a great job of rallying through that and getting the folks on the team, helping the clients out. I mean, really impressive, and heard some great feedback from a lot of the companies that bank with you guys. So guys, with that, thank you for being on here. Thank you to Carlton and Nelson, you guys, for joining us today and dedicating your time and the work you put into this. And we're hoping for you guys out there that this was a real informative session for you. There are more questions that we'll get to in the email that we provide after the fact. And there's some other resources that Carlton had mentioned that we'll provide as well. That's really what we're trying to do, is bring value to you guys, do it in a fun way, and make sure that everybody's focused on moving through this time, this COVID coup.
Jim frozen.
Jim froze. Well, again, I can't thank you guys enough for being part of this. Always a pleasure. Carlton, you do a great job with the chamber, and thanks for all you're doing out there for small businesses and helping make, quite honestly, us bankers, our jobs a little easier because of the support you're giving those and the tools you're giving those folks.
Thank you, Nelson. And what I'd say to the business community is we're going to work as hard as we can to be a trusted resource for you. You don't have to be a member of the chamber to leverage some of those resources. That's kind of our position in the community. So we'll continue doing that, and I'll get back with Jim to make sure we get some of those resources to you. And again, thank you guys for checking in with us today, and looking forward to your success.
All right, over and out.
All right.
Thank you guys for everything. Panelists, everyone, the webinar is over.